Hello, everyone. I'm Sandy Rosenthal with Beat the Big Guys podcast, and I am so excited about the guest that I have with me today. Her name is Dr. Kimberly Terrell. Hello, Kimberly Terrell. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you for having me.
I am really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to be having shortly. But first, I need to tell my listeners just a little bit more about you, okay?
Great.
Okay. Dr. Terrell has served as research scientist and director of community engagement at Tulane's Environmental Law Clinic since 2018. And while still a student at Tulane, she was awarded the university's Environmental Stewardship Award for her work in developing Campus Cats. It's the program to humanely reduce the local stray cat populations. And I really, really love that. I think that's a wonderful thing. And we're going to talk about that more in just a moment. Dr. Terrell's graduate research was conducted at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute in Washington, D.C., and focused on endangered big cat species. With her knowledge of environmental issues and experience with working with frontline communities, Dr. Terrell helps concerned citizens engage in environmental decision-making and access the legal resources of the Environmental Law Clinic. This is all wonderful. Again, welcome. And why don't we start out with you talking a little, but you know what, before we begin, I just got to point something out that I also believe in reducing the local stray cat population, and you are talking to a certified cat trapper. I've been trained to catch stray cats and humanely and carefully. We use treats, and then they're brought to be neutered and spayed and treated for any worms that they might have. And then we bring them back and release them. And it's been one of the most satisfying and rewarding programs I've ever done. And I'm so happy, Dr. Terrell, to find out that you have been personally involved in work like this.
Yeah, it's a great connection that we have. And I think one of the reasons that people are so drawn to that kind of work is that you can see the results of your efforts, right? You can see that, there's fewer hungry cats out there. The cats that are there are, better fed because they're not competing for as many resources. And it's something very tangible that you can do to try to benefit, animals and the environment. Because I think
it's like Christmas morning when you come out in the morning and look and see what you caught in the night. And I think my favorite catch was catching a mother cat that I knew was creating litter after litter in my neighborhood. That was a big day when we caught her. She wasn't happy about it, but I knew that it was a good thing for our neighborhood, for her, for everyone. So when you developed your program, were you working with trap, neuter, release with the SPCA?
Yes, actually we were working with Southern Animal Foundation at the time because they had a free program where you could bring a feral cat and they would spay or neuter it for no cost. So it was really incredible, and it was open to any resident of Orleans Parish. And I think part of it was that period also included right after Hurricane Katrina. So I think if I remember correctly, after the hurricane, there were even more resources available for trap, neuter, release.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm so impressed, and I'm also pleased that we have a connection.
Me too.
So let's go ahead. I mean, our listeners are listening because they are looking for ways to make their communities better by taking on the big guys in their communities. So is there a story that you can share with us that you think people can find empowerment and encouragement in?
Yeah, I think the first story that comes to mind relates to a chemical plant called Wanwa that was proposed to be built in St. James Parish at the heart of Cancer Alley. And it was relatively recent. So I think it was 2019 that this was proposed. And for any of your audience who's not familiar with St. James Parish, it's very heavily industrialized. And it's not evenly, right? It's the African-American districts, the impoverished districts where heavy industry is concentrated. And these facilities in many cases are built within a mile of people's homes. So we have clients at the clinic who can, from their kitchen window, see an enormous industrial facility and see the pollutants coming out of it. And I think what people don't realize is that the homes were there first, right? The homes were there for generations. So this was yet another plant that was proposed, and it would have produced a chemical that is then used to make foam. Foam is something that, this particular chemical is something that is highly toxic and releases a lot of toxic pollution, air pollution, in the production of this chemical. So there were a lot of reasons why the residents were opposed to this facility. And they reached out to us, Tulane Environmental Law Clinic, and asked for our help challenging the parish's approval of this facility. Because one thing, for anyone who wants to stand up to the big guys or challenge the big guys, it's really important to understand the permitting process. Mm-hmm. Permits are your opportunity to have influence. And so expressing your viewpoint and commenting on these permits is really important, because that leaves open the opportunity to challenge them legally, right? So we were representing a group of local residents, and, I'm digging through all this technical documentation related to the permit application. And I have a background in environmental science, but I'm not an environmental engineer. I'm not an air modeler. A lot of the stuff that I was looking at was unfamiliar to me. But I noticed, where I started and where I honed in was, okay, well, what are the specific pollutants that this facility is going to release? And, do any of them stand out? And can I find information about the health impacts that may help the community, strengthen their argument? So I was looking at one pollutant in particular called phosgene. And I did a little research, and by research, like, I'm talking about just Google it, right? Like, this is something that anybody can do, right? Just Google it. And the first thing I find is that phosgene was used in chemical warfare in World War II, right? So I think most people understand, that's a pretty compelling argument, right? This is something that you can't try to convince me it's safe when we used it as a chemical agent, to kill the largest number of people of any chemical agent in war. And so, through just a little bit more searching, I found the CDC's website and found some information about, what to do in an emergency situation with phosgene. And something that stood out to me was that this is a very heavy gas, and it accumulates in low-lying areas. And CDC's recommendation was, hey, if there's a release, avoid low-lying areas. So then I look at the permit and I see that the company says, as part of the permit, we're supposed to say what would happen in an emergency situation. And our experts say that the phosgene would float up 300 feet into the air and disperse. And again, I'm not an environmental engineer, but I said, well, hey, the company's saying it'll float 300 feet into the air. CDC tells me it sinks to the ground. Something's not consistent here. And so, in our comments challenging this permit approval, we flagged that issue. And we said, hey, we want more information about this emergency modeling that the company did. And how is it that something that's heavier than air is going to rise 300 feet into the air and no one will be exposed to it? And so ultimately, it was really interesting, right? And ultimately what happened was the company told the parish, okay, well, we won't do the phosgene part at this facility. We will do that back in China where the company is headquartered, and we'll just do the second half of the production process at this new facility. Unfortunately, what that meant was they would no longer need chlorine, and they were originally proposing to purchase chlorine from another industrial company that they were renting this land from. And so the other company said, hey, if you're not going to buy our chlorine, we're not going to let you rent this land, lease this land. And so, you know, you pull this one little string and ultimately the whole project fell apart. And, you know, of course, if you ask the company, I'm sure they would say it was changing business needs. You know, it wasn't all this community opposition. And there was a really important concerted grassroots movement, you know, to mobilize people on the ground, because no matter what technical argument you have, if the local people support the project, you're not going to stop it, right? Like it's important that the local community be a part of this, and really at the forefront of it. But just to, you know, one thing I really want to leave people with is what that experience taught me is that you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to ask the questions, and you just need to sometimes just flag the issue and say, hey, you know, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't sound right. And so, you know, I think people oftentimes feel like you have to be a total expert in something in order to engage. And you really don't. You just have to be paying attention and thinking on your feet.
That's a great way to end this. And I think everything you've said is important, but that last one I think is critical. You don't have to know all the answers. In other words, you out there who may not be an environmental engineer or an environmental scientist or an attorney or any of these things, you don't have to have all the answers. All you have to do is ask the questions. And I'm going to extend it just a little bit. You demand an answer. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Terrell, but did it ever happen that questions were asked and you wait and you didn't get your answer?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened in the phosgene situation, right? We said, you know, how is it that something heavier than air is going to float away? Can you, you know, show us the details of that modeling? And they never did, right? They never answered that question because that question was an inconvenient truth, right? And so, you know, yeah, exactly like you say. Just
I have found that one of the number one most favorite tool of the big guys is delay on response to questions. Delay. You know, I've seen it. Personally, I've seen it, and there's one other place I've seen it in response to a request under the Freedom of Information Act. And it's the law that they're supposed to respond within 3 weeks, I believe. They're supposed to acknowledge receipt within 3 days and then give a response in 3 weeks. I've had responses delayed as much as a year, but
wow.
but that was really great point. And I also feel it's very empowering because one of the things that would worry a would-be citizen out there trying to beat the big guys, standing up to the big guys, is, well, I don't have all the answers and I don't know everything. You know, what can I possibly do? Well, you don't have to. So that is such a great point. But you also mentioned a lot of other great things. I wanted to go back for just a moment to what you said about how it's critical that the local residents have to support this thing going on in your community, be it a chemical plant, or be it plopping down, you know, a building that in the middle of a historic district, of a skyscraper in the middle of a historic district, whatever it is, the local residents have to support it. Can you expand on that a little? On if that's the case, how can we use that?
Yeah, so that has been really important in the work that we've done in Cancer Alley, because you know, it's pretty easy to find a national environmental group that will oppose an environmentally destructive project, right? You could You can reach out to Sierra Club, you can reach out to,
Environmental defense,
exactly.
National Wildlife Federation. There's lots of them, of national
Yes,
organizations.
Center for Biological Diversity is
That's a great one.
And those groups bring a lot of resources to the table and really know the process. And what I've seen industry do is try to portray the situation as, well, these are outsiders coming in, and these outsiders aren't invested in the community, and these outsiders don't care about local jobs. And when you have the movement led, by community members who are opposing these plants, that is so important, right? Because then you can say, no, we're supporting the local community. This is what the local community wants. They want to breathe clean air. They want to have their home values protected. They want clean jobs, and we're lifting them up and amplifying their voices. It's not our own agenda, it's the local agenda.
Exactly. I'm going to pause for just a moment, okay, and put on pause. So the local residents are special, for lack of a better word. I guess they have more credibility. They have more. Can it maybe help me here a little bit? I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to put it into words. Why the local people matter.
Yeah, I mean, I think credibility is the heart of it, right? Because when your argument is that this project, even though it's environmentally destructive, that it's economically beneficial, the people who can speak to the economic benefits or the economic, impacts or lack of benefits are the people who live right there, right? And when we hear, over and over from the community members, hey, we're not getting these jobs aren't going within the community. We still have high poverty rates in our community. We still have people who are unemployed, and our home values are diminishing because of these facilities that are being built, within eyesight of our front porch. Those are the arguments that are very compelling at the local level. And just quickly, I also want to point out that there are multiple levels of permitting depending on the project. Some projects need a federal permit, some projects need a state permit, sometimes you need local approval, sometimes you need all three. And what we've found is that if a project needs local approval, like parish or county approval or city approval, that is where you have the greatest opportunity to have influence, because those decision makers are accountable to you, because there's an election coming up at some point and they're going to need you. And if you really, if you can mobilize some support in your community, it really can make a big difference, especially at the local level. Gotcha.
And it's not intuitive. In other words, the local residents just have natural power, natural magic powers, just by virtue of where they live. And it's probably not intuitive. I'm certain that residents don't realize the power they have just by virtue of the fact of where they're located.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for people who live in communities where your local representative is not being responsive and does not share your concerns, that is probably the most challenging situation. And that is where I think having some strong allies in state, regional, and national environmental groups can be really helpful, right? Because for me in my neighborhood, when I'm dealing with an air quality problem, I call up my councilman, I call up my state representative, and both of them are people who are concerned about environmental issues. And so I'm privileged in that way that I have access, to my decision makers and that they share my concerns. And so I think really where people, are up against a difficult situation is when they live in communities where their local representatives, are not listening to their environmental concerns.
And while you were fortunate in that instance, you utilize everything you can at your disposal. You utilize every ally at your disposal. You use them because you're up against sometimes enormous odds against, I'm sure this chemical plant had a bundle of money to spend on misinformation and on lining the pockets of local politicians. So you can feel really weak in the face of all that. But no, the locals, they do have that power. And I think and should use everything at their disposal, even if it's politicians that might be friendly to you. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. And one last quick example from that plant, in addition to technical information, sometimes you can find something that, it's not a technical issue, but it just makes them look really bad. And so the other little gem that we found, again, just through a Google search, is, I was looking at job ads for this facility because even though it wasn't constructed yet, they were already advertising jobs for it because they're trying to sell the economic benefits. And one of the few job ads I found was for an engineer, and it required fluency in Mandarin. And how many people in rural Louisiana are fluent in Mandarin, right? So, again, it's not a legal argument, it's not a technical argument, but it just looked real bad for that company. And that is something that resonated with local council members, right? Because whatever your views on the environment are, if somebody is selling you on local jobs, you need to speak a foreign language in order to get that job. That just looks awful.
Yeah, it looks terrible. And trust what you see. Trust what you see. And speaking along those lines and trusting, you had found out through Googling, and not it's not like you had to pay money to do this research. Okay, you were able to find out about how this gas is a heavy gas, and it was in contrary to the things you were reading about it. So even though, as you said, you're not an environmental engineer, you can read and you can think and you can trust yourself and trust that you've hit on a good point. And I think that's something that one of the things that you need to do, you need to trust your own common sense. You need to trust your own ability to make a determination and go, wait a minute, wait just 1 minute. This doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. And I would add to that you also need to have patience because, your first hour that you spend in front of a computer, if you find something like that, that's this huge gem, that's great. But chances are you won't, right? Chances are you're going to bang your head against the wall for a while. And it's going to feel, you're going to feel like I'm lost. What is there? I don't know. But it's that persistence and that confidence of, you are an expert of your own community, right? Whoever's proposing this project, they don't live in your block. They don't know the history of your neighborhood. That's something that you have that you bring to the table. So it's, it really, I can't emphasize enough that I think everyone in your audience has significant power to influence the decisions that affect their community.
I totally believe in you. And I think that was a great ending point. You won't find your silver bullet on your first day.
Right.
But it will come with patience, and your silver bullet might not be, someone with a knife in their hand. It's probably going to be something like this tidbit that you just talked about, and each story, each time that people rose up and beat the big guys, it was something just like this. Something that turned the tables, that was clear to everyone, and anyone that can think could see it, and it told the real story about what was going on. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. But is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I guess just lastly, if it can be hard to know where to start when you're just trying to get involved, and it can be really hard to keep up with, all the environmental issues that are going on. So reach out to a local environmental organization, whether it's the Sierra Club, if you're in Louisiana, Louisiana Environmental Action Network, Louisiana Bucket Brigade, because there are organizations who keep their fingers on the pulse of these projects and these issues. So don't feel like you have to overnight become an expert in everything, right? Reach out to other people who are doing this kind of work and say, hey, what are the big things going on right now? How can I get involved? And then just have patience and confidence that you will make a difference. And there might be a learning curve. But if it affects you, you're going to be motivated to make something happen and to make some good change happen.
Absolutely. Do you have any final gem of encouragement for our listeners, which is nationwide, by the way?
Oh, well, I would just say that I feel like we're in sort of a new era where people are thinking about environmental justice, and it's part of kind of the national conversation. And I think that the next couple years, we have an opportunity that we have never had in the history of this country to start protecting and bringing justice to these communities that have been overburdened with pollution for so long.
Well, that's wonderful. I feel better already listening to those wonderful words of encouragement. Thank you again, Dr. Kimberly Terrell, for joining me. And I hope all of you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on all of your favorite platforms. And remember, no matter who you are, you can beat the big guys.
Thank you so much, Sandy.
Thank you. Here, stay on just for a moment. I'm going to stop recording.